Back in my day, you could spend $40 and get a full game with no microtransactions or DLC bullcrap. Yeah, and gasoline was 30 cents a gallon. Hi, I'm Loxton, and today we are going to look at the question, has gaming gotten more expensive? The video game industry, marketing, capitalism, all that. It's always interesting to see how things have changed over the times. But in just the last few years, there have been a number of people concerned over the price of admission for gaming. That being not only the cost of the games themselves, but also all of the add-ons. Not to mention all of the costs of the consoles themselves. And of course, there are many factors to consider, including the viewpoint of the developer and publishers. As much as you would love for all gaming to be free, your fantasy world does not exist, and will not anytime soon. Also, I should point out that this is entirely from the viewpoint of the United States. Other countries have other factors involved that raise or lower the price of gaming, and I will get to those eventually in a later video. So first, let's cover the most obvious issue, inflation. Inflation is a general increase of prices and a fall in the purchasing value of money. Long story short, as time goes on, things get more expensive. But people are also making more money, hence the term adjusting for inflation. This means, for instance, if you were to look at a fresh loaf of bread in 1962, you would be expected to pay around 21 cents for it. And that's not because bread back then was made of dirt, so it was dirt cheap. Rather, it's because everything was cheaper. But people also made less money. So first, let's adjust the prices of video games and video game systems for inflation. Starting back before the great video game crash. The Atari 2600 cost $199.99 to purchase, and the games ran between $15 and $30. Now adjust that for inflation, and the console today would be $780, and the games would be $80 to $120. Now the $400 PS4 doesn't feel so bad, huh? Though there are other factors to consider, and we'll get to those, but first let's continue with inflation. Take a look at this old Super Nintendo ad. Street Fighter Alpha 2, Mortal Kombat 3, $70? And this was in 1996! Adjusting for inflation means that these games cost $106. $50 to $70 was the average price for games during this time period, meaning Super Nintendo games at their cheapest, adjusted for inflation, were about $75. Which is quite a bit more than the $60 maximum price tag minigames today have brand new. Though, as I've said again and again, there are a lot more factors to consider than just the cost of games adjusted for inflation, since a lot of games these days have DLC and whatnot. And we'll get to that in a bit, but first I need to bring up another point, the cartridge-to-disc transition. Cartridge-based games are expensive to make, that is, physically. A lot of the money goes to the factories for putting all of this plastic around a computer chip. Whereas CDs are significantly cheaper to produce. They're mostly silicone and are very, very thin. Meaning game companies could easily lower the price of their new games and make the same profit that they did before. And plus, in modern times, a lot of games are digital, meaning no manufacturing costs at all, completely skipping the middleman. But as for the time when discs were brand new, did that really lower the cost of games for the consumers, or just the developers? Well, the first major console to use exclusively discs was the original PlayStation. And if you look at the price of its games, they were still being sold for an average of $60 to $90. That being $90 to $135 in today's money. So at first, switching to discs had no effect, but as the years went on, various game developers wanted more competitive prices, meaning lower. And since manufacturing didn't cost them as much, they could easily do that. So in time, the cost of games did begin to drop. And drop until the bottom of its spike around 2005, where the average cost of a new game was between $45 and $65, or by today's money, $55 and $80. Prices peaked again in 2008 before going back down, but as of right now, today, the average cost of a new game is $40 to $60, and that is by today's money. Meaning right now, at this point in history, games are the cheapest they have ever been. However, some people counter that claim because of DLC and microtransactions. And that is very true. DLC, the downloadable extra content that many games these days offer. And while not required for you to purchase by any means, many people feel that you need the DLC to get the entire product of a game, as opposed to having an expansion pack like in some ages past. And no matter your view on DLC and its true value, let's look at some modern examples. If you bought Fallout 4 brand new, along with the Season Pass, which gets you all of the DLC, you will have spent $90 in total, $60 for the base game and $30 on the DLC. Star Wars Battlefront is also $60 for the base game, but then $50 for all of the DLC, putting it at $110. Super Smash Bros. 4, minus all the Mii outfits because they are purely cosmetic and dumb, really you could count them as microtransactions, has $46 of DLC, meaning $106 for the full game. And the list goes on, and plenty of outliers too, games that have tons of DLC, and games that have none at all. But even when you look at these prices, they still haven't beaten the costs of new PS1 games. But they are getting close for sure, through DLC, which is 100% optional, and if you don't mind waiting, mini games with high amounts of DLC will later re-release themselves with all of the DLC included for the same price as a brand new base game, that being $50 to $60. Plus, consider that now we have more indie games than ever before. Even if you don't count the mass loads of bad ones, most indie games range from $5 to $20, and can offer you just as much fun and gameplay as plenty of AAA $60 games. Plus, if you mainly game on PC, Steam prices are insanely cheap compared to other digital markets, especially during the Holy Summer Sale. Sometimes you can find normally full-price AAA games that are only a few months old at half price. But that's how they hook you on the base game, and then charge full price for all the DLC. Now let's look at another factor, the size of the market. Back in the late 20th century, gaming was a lot more niche. So of course games would be more expensive. In order to make up for the cost of making the game, they had to charge more per sale, because they weren't expecting as many sales. Whereas today, AAA games can expect to sell by the truckload. Millions upon millions of copies. So they could easily lower the cost of the game and make a similar profit, right? No. Because the cost of making AAA games has also skyrocketed. Just look at Grand Theft Auto 5. Their budget was $137 million, and that's without the marketing budget, by the way. Final Fantasy XIII, $65 million. Metal Gear Solid 5, $80 million. Whereas the average development budget for a game made in 2000 was between $2 and $4 million. Adjusting that for inflation only adds about another million. Really, if markets were the same size they were in the 90s, then either gaming would be a lot more expensive today, or games would never see such high budgets. The only reason why these games are still so profitable is because there are significantly more gamers today than there were 10 years ago. And yet, despite the massively larger market we have today, a lot of games, especially AAA ones, will never make a profit. Because they have to compete with these historically low prices. So to make up for it, they make more DLC, make more microtransactions, because that's the only way they can expect to make a profit. And that's not to say every game ever needs DLC to make a profit. That is not true whatsoever. Just look at Star Wars Battlefront. Nor is this a defense of the incredible, shall I say, amazingness that is EA business practices. But despite gaming being the cheapest it's ever been, that's not to say that affording mini games is easy. Like any hobby, it's expensive. So there's no shame in not being able to afford that extra bit of DLC and shaking your fist wildly about the good old days back when games were cheaper. And hey, I'm here to help. I've got something to help you make a little bit of extra money for gaming. It's the sponsor to this video, Cash for Apps. A simple app for both iPhone and Android that will allow you to earn points just for trying out other apps. Then you can turn in those points for gift cards, including GameStop, PSN, and Xbox digital gift cards. I've been using it for a little while now, and now I have enough to get a $10 gift card. And I've discovered a few games and apps that I like along the way. So if you need that extra bit of game money, try out Cash for Apps by following the link in the description. Doing so also really helps Gnoggin in funding our future endeavors. so thank you so much for checking it out. And until next time, stay awesome, and never stop using that noggin. Gotten more expensive. The video game industry, marketing, capitalism, all that. It's always interesting to see how things have changed over the times. But in just the last few years, there have been a number of people concerned over the price of admission video. So first, let's cover the most obvious issue, inflation. Inflation is a general increase of prices and a fall in the purchasing value of money. Long story short, as time goes on, things get more expensive. But people are also making more money. Back in my day, you could spend $40 and get a full game with no microtransactions or DLC bullcrap. Yeah, and gasoline was 30 cents a gallon. Hi, I'm Loxton, and today we are going to look at the question, has gaming you would love for all gaming to be free? Your fantasy world does not exist, and will not anytime soon. Also, I should point out that this is entirely from the viewpoint of the United States. Other countries have other factors involved that raise or lower the price of gaming, and I will get to those eventually in a later for gaming. That being not only the cost of the games themselves, but also all of the add-ons. Not to mention all of the costs of the consoles themselves. And of course, there are many factors to consider, including the viewpoint of the developer and publishers. As much as